So in this talk, since you've gone through the Torah and you've seen how I've been teaching, and the Torah is mostly narrative or story, not entirely, but mostly, I want us to think, and I want to talk with you a bit about my own approach to teaching narrative. And remember, when we're talking about stories, I've talked about how we always bring certain expectations to the stories we read. We expect in a good story there's going to be plot and characters and climaxes and tension. I've been trying to point these things out to hopefully help you not only learn the story of the Bible, but want to learn it, to want to read it, because the Bible is an incredible book. But now, as we think back to all of these different lessons that we've been going through, I want to give you an idea of how I think about teaching narrative, because my hope is that you won't just become a reader of the Bible, but you'll become a lover of the Bible. You'll become a person who wants to share the Bible with other people. And I think some of these things might be helpful for you, whether you're sharing it privately or whether you're actually getting a chance to teach the Bible. I want to think specifically about how we handle narrative, how we teach or communicate story. One of the things that maybe an overarching principle here is that I always want to treat narrative or story as story. I want to teach narrative as narrative. And some of the implications of this are things like this. I want to tell the story in a way that fits with it being a story. So in other words, it'd be rare, I doubt you have ever heard me say in this study, welcome to Genesis 1. I want to share today 3 points and 2 subpoints that I have found in Genesis 1. I don't do that. I would think of almost never doing that. Or coming to the story, an gripping story of Abraham offering Isaac and saying, now I know that we've all heard the story of Abraham almost offering Isaac many, many times. But I'm going to talk about that story today. It's like, why would you do that? As soon as you say it that way, what happens? No one wants to listen to the story. It's boring to do this, and it distracts us from the story by talking about it that way. So that's one implication, that just as I teach through it, I want to tell the story in a way that fits with it being a story. So don't just try to pull out random points or something. Tell it as it unfolds. But another idea of this in teaching through the Bible is my personal approach in this is if I don't want to go ahead of where we are in the story, at least in this particular class and this study, because that's not how a story works, to just be jumping ahead or bringing in information that doesn't come to way later in the story and bringing it back into this part of the story. Now we can and we should consider what has come before where we are in the story, and I am often doing that, but what I'm suggesting is, at least in the way I'm teaching this, I don't want to go ahead of where we are in the story and try to bring that back into the story, at least at first. Now, of course, I'm a Christian, and I do know where the story is going, and that is shaping how I tell the story, but I think there is value in at least initially telling the story as story and only using what's come before it to try to grasp what's going on in the story. Later, of course, like I just said with the value of the reread in our other segment, you can bring in the other things and it'll help you. But when you're telling the story, let it unfold. Share it with people as it unfolds and get them to try to engage with it. What happens if we always are reaching forward and just pulling things back in? We're no longer treating narrative as narrative, and we very well may be stealing something away from the reader or the listener. But we might think, but wouldn't that help if we pulled in what it said in Revelation into right here what it says in Genesis? Well, it does help in a certain way, but in the sense of trying to tell the story, it might actually take something away from the reader or the listener, right? What does it take away? It takes away maybe the joy of reading, the suspense, the waiting, the longing to see how it's all going to work out, how it's all going to unfold. So just a couple implications there. I try to tell the story in a way that fits with it being a story, and try not to go ahead of where we are in the story, but only to reach back to where we've already been. Now, the thing that I want to close with, though, in this segment is I want to think, what's the goal of teaching narrative as narrative? Like, what are we actually trying to get the hearer to do when we tell the story as story? Because I'm not like extrapolating, or just pulling out 2 or 3 big things you should remember from this, but rather trying to tell the story as story. And what's the goal of this? Maybe you've seen the movie Up the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen this with the 2 characters, Carl and Ellie. It's an awesome movie. Like the first 10 minutes of the movie, there's like 5 words, but everybody's weeping by the end of the first 10 minutes because it basically is pictures or little clips of their life, and it goes the whole way through their life, from the time they met when they were kids to the time, through all their ups and downs and sorrows in life, to the time when Ellie dies and Carl's all by himself. And at the end of it, the first few minutes, you're like, I never thought this was going to happen in this animated movie. I don't watch animated movies to cry, this sort of thing. But then after you start and you think about it, it's really gripping. And you start to think, wow, I bet Carl, as an old man, wishes he could go back and live that over again. The thing, with the wisdom that he has now, I bet you he wishes he could go back and do it again. And it gets us longing for that a bit. To be able to go back and change things. To be able to go back with what we know now and relive certain things. I don't know if you ever thought about what it would be like to be able to go back and live junior high or high school over again. Or maybe you're younger, to go back and live a few years ago over again with what you know now. You might think, like me, I never want to go back to junior high. But to think about what it would be like if you could take the wisdom that you have now acquired and to be able to go back, like what would change? I think so much would change, right? Because it'd be great if you could live your life again knowing what you know now. That's what we would think, right? What if you were 70 or 80 years old and you think, oh, I wish I could go back. There's so many things I would have done differently. And my question is, can we do that? Can we live life over again? And on the one hand, we have to say we can't. We only get one chance, only one life. But on the other hand, I want to suggest that we can. We can, in a sense, get the opportunity to live life again and again. God has made it so that in one sense we can never go back. Life's short, we only get one chance. No mulligans, no second chances to go back and do it again. But on the other hand, God has given us the opportunity to live our lives beforehand, or maybe to live our lives over and over again. And how is that? It's by entering the story of the Bible and living the lives of the characters with them. This is my goal in how I teach narrative. I want you to enter the story, to live with the characters, to see what they see, to feel what they feel, to hear what they hear, and to learn what they were supposed to learn. There's something that can be learned through narrative, through story, that cannot be learned through me simply giving you a list of 7 points to remember for life. Think of this. It's one thing to say or to hear, messing around with alcohol can ruin your life. Right? There's truth in that. You can hear that line, that proposition. But it's another thing to sit down with a 30-year-old guy who looks 50, who's now homeless, divorced, with 2 kids he can't hardly see anymore, has a hard time speaking clearly, to sit next to him and to listen to him tell his story of the last 11 years. He may never tell you messing around with alcohol may ruin your life. But when you hear his story and you feel his story, you walk away impacted in a far different way through the story than just through the simple line. In a similar way, it's one thing to hear, God cares about helpless people. But it's another thing to see Hagar, remember her, as a pregnant woman fleeing from Sarai, or to see her and her son cast out to die, feeling like she just is going to walk away from her child because she just doesn't want to see him die. She's got nobody to care for her. And then to see God meet her unexpectedly and to help her in her need. And what do we see? We see God cares about the helpless in a way through the story that we never could have grasped just by hearing the simple proposition. To hear sin has consequences is far different than seeing what Adam and Eve saw and felt and experienced when their first son murders their second son, and they know it's because of the decisions they made back in the garden. Otherwise this never would have happened. We realize sin has consequences in a far deeper way. If we live with the characters, we gain their experience of life, of living beforehand, or of living our lives over and over again. Narrative makes it possible for us to enter another world, the world of the text, the world of the Bible, and to live life over and over, and then to come back from walking with Abraham, with the things that Abraham learned, and to bring it back to your own life. It gives us the chance, in a sense, to be able to do what people on their deathbed long for. The chance to go back and to live knowing what they know now. That's why when you are teaching or sharing the story, I want to try to encourage you to share it or to teach it in a way that gets people to enter into the story. Think of how we tell stories to kids, how captivated they can be by the story, how they learn by just entering into the story. And that's also why when we read the Bible, we have to be engaged in the Bible. Sadly, we're often lacking energy when we're reading the Bible. But by God's grace, maybe we can grow in that. And as we are going through this study, we can learn what to look for, and we can give ourselves to the text and try to really enter in with these characters and live what they're living and see what they're seeing about God, so that when we come back to our own world, we're able to live with the wisdom and the experiences now in our life that we gained through living with them.